They wanted to finally regulate how much PFAS they could release in their wastewater into like waterways and downstream to wastewater treatment plants. And the Trump issued an executive order that pulled back, it put on a regulatory freeze and pulled back all regulations in process. And this was one of them. So now PFAS polluters, they can continue to just release as much PFAS into the waterways and wastewater systems.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Happy to be joined by Mary Grant. You are the Public Water Director with Food and Water Watch. And frankly, it seems Donald Trump is going to war against people and their water. He's going to war on a lot of things, but water is pretty critical. I think we agree. So I want to start. There's him trying to reverse positive things the Biden administration was doing on PFAS, which are those forever chemicals, also on removing lead pipes that bring us our water. But first, I want to start with his decision to release nearly 2 billion gallons of water in California, which nearly flooded his own supporters' farms. Let me show this clip. This is Congressman Ted Lieu kind of explaining the stupidity of this. Let's take a listen.
I just want to explain, when you solve for the wrong problem, not only do you not get the solution, you can cause harm. So Donald Trump has it in his mind that somehow there's a spigot in Northern California, he's going to open a valve and dump water to Southern California. Here are the facts. Southern California's reservoirs are at near record levels when this fire happened. Didn't matter, because Donald Trump then ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to release over 2 billion gallons of water that almost flooded farmland, if not for the local water districts that pushed back. But guess what? This water was saved for the farmers for the summer season when they needed the water. And so the president wasted all this water that isn't even reaching Southern California. It's going to evaporate for a PR stunt. So this was a harmful, ludicrous action to solve for the wrong problem.
So I can't get in Donald Trump's head, but does he not understand that it's not water management, or that's not the problem in California with these wildfires? What are your thoughts on this? What the congressman said was a PR stunt.
Yeah, I believe it is just a political stunt. He said that he would release water for farmers in California. So he wanted to do it big and splashy, but he also did it in a way that was dangerous for farmers and will hurt them in the long run. And the farmers in the Central Valley where the water was released, it's water that they needed for the summer. California's going into a potentially another drought. I mean, the reservoirs are full now, but it was a pretty dry summer or pretty dry winter in California. So there's people already speculating that the state might enter another drought, and those farmers will really need that water that was just lost because of that political stunt. And these are folks that supported Trump. So I think one of the lessons to take away from this is that he doesn't care who he hurts. He hurts his own supporters all the time, just with these political stunts, wanting to be right, and this big, flashy, like stunt. There's no other way to say it, but it's also very dangerous for people and for the planet.
And also, when we say dangerous, I mean, local leaders were able to lower the amount that was released. But if he would have gotten his way to release 2 billion, it could have killed people. I mean, if you're flooding out farms, it's not just equipment. He could have killed farmers by flooding them out. Am I dramatizing?
No, it was on track to be a really big flooding it unexpectedly, no warning, happening really fast. And so water managers had to scramble, the state had to scramble to try to talk them back. So 2.2 billion gallons were released, but I think they were talking about as much as 5 billion gallons, so more than twice that, and flooding. And it would have caused massive flooding had the state and local irrigation managers not intervened.
And, I do have some MAGA people who watch. I'm not trying to condescend, but can you explain that, he said that this was somehow to help the wildfires, and the wildfires were out of control because California's governor is an idiot and they don't know how to manage water. Can you explain that it's not so much water mismanagement as it is unprecedented wildfires that, I mean, we also know Wall Street deals have stripped bare a lot of emergency response and fire trucks there. But what is reality versus Trump in terms of the wildfires and water management?
Sure. So when the water was released, most of those wildfires had already been contained, first of all. Second of all, the water didn't reach Los Angeles. Los Angeles is 200 miles south. The water didn't reach it. It ended up in like retention ponds. So some of it did soak down into the groundwater, but some of it was lost. And the fires in California and Los Angeles in particular were not the result of insufficient water. I know early on there were talk about like Los Angeles not having sufficient water supplies because fire hydrants lost water supply, but it wasn't that the city didn't have enough water. It didn't have the infrastructure in place to move the water fast enough to where it needed to go because of how unprecedented those fires were. So the issues with fire hydrants and water tanks had nothing to do with the amount of water being transported to Southern California. So as the representative mentioned, like this was not a solution to the problem, right? Like it that wasn't the problem at hand. So the state does face long-term shortages and drought, and we know that climate change is accelerating that. So we've seen this happen over the past decade. So climate change is driving drier conditions, and we have unsustainable levels of water-intensive crops, factory farms, and continued extraction of fossil fuels in the state. But at the Pacific Palisades fire hydrants lost water pressure because of the extreme demand for water to fight those unprecedented fires. They couldn't have aerial support come in because of the hurricane force winds. So it was just an unprecedented situation because of climate change and climate change conditions. And it wasn't that the city lacked water, its water infrastructure is not resilient enough to face the demands of a changing climate. So there do need to be major investments in the water system, but it's not to move more water from Northern California down. It's about better using and moving its own water to face these emergent challenges driven by climate change.
And now we pivot to water we need to drink and live. Biden's EPA, I had a lot of issues with. The EPA in general, I have a lot of issues with. I'm sure Food and Water Watch does as well. However, to his credit, his EPA was trying to finally regulate PFAS, which are those forever chemicals that are linked to cancer, reproductive issues. There's been no regulation on it. They were at least trying to regulate it. One of Trump's, 10,000 executive orders was to reverse that. As well as reverse Biden administration trying to remove the lead service lines that deliver our water. Let's start with the PFAS because, this is all over the country, discharged into waterways. I've covered it on the ground in North Carolina and elsewhere. Even under Biden, the regulations were not in place. It was moving it along. How dangerous is it to public health that Trump is now trying to reverse what was even, minimal regulations?
No, it's awful. PFAS are known to be carcinogenic. They cause cancer in people. And one of the best ways to address PFAS is to stop it at the source. So these are the regulations that Trump reversed. There had been work stuck at the White House, regulations to finally regulate the wastewater of just PFAS manufacturers, the companies that make PFAS. They wanted to finally regulate how much PFAS they could release in their wastewater into waterways and downstream to wastewater treatment plants. So this was a very tiny rule to finally just try to hold some of those PFAS polluters, the direct manufacturers of PFAS, accountable for removing it from our water. And the Trump issued an executive order that pulled back, it put on a regulatory freeze and pulled back all regulations in process. And this was one of them that was just on the chopping block because of this executive order in action. So now PFAS polluters, they can continue to just release as much PFAS into the waterways and wastewater systems. This is very concerning because, again, it's the best way to stop PFAS in our drinking water. There are regulations that the Biden administration did put in place to finally regulate 6 types of PFAS in our drinking water, but that burden is on ratepayers, it's on local water utilities to update treatment systems. And they're gonna have to update treatment systems to pay to remove the PFAS that got into our drinking water supplies because these companies are allowed unfettered access to pollute our water with PFAS. This is an injustice, it's inequitable, it's harmful for people, and it's going to lead to higher rates on households to pay to clean up the PFAS's manufacturers' corporate mess, this corporate pollution that we are on the hook to paying to clean it up because we're not regulating those companies.
And like, I don't know, not a lot of things are, not political these days, but it seems like water, like, I don't think there's like a huge army of Republicans who say poison the water. What is the thinking behind this? The only thing I can think of is, chemical industry lobbyists, Trump and his administration wanting to cater to them. But like, why would one of the first things, this isn't like a ooh, boo, clean energy. This is like clean water. What would be the thinking behind doing this?
Well, he just issued a blanket executive order that all regulations and process were frozen and sent back. So it was caught up in that huge net that they just canceled all regulatory action. He also issued another executive order since then that for every new regulation you do, you have to get rid of 10 rules and regulations. So it's going to make it really hard to regulate PFAS manufacturers and just stop the release of PFAS into our waterways because of these executive actions. So there's a lot of talk about wanting to prioritize safe water at the EPA, but how can they do that when they can't even issue regulations to make our water safer? How can they do that when industry lobbyists are now in charge of rulemaking at EPA? There's a lot of industry lobbyists who are getting nominated for seats at EPA. And it's really concerning that we're not going to have the regulations we need to keep our water safe. And again, this, like you said, this is something that has been traditionally bipartisan. Everyone wants safe drinking water. Why wouldn't you? But it's, again, just one of the harms of going after regulations that people don't always think about. How do we keep our water safe? How do we make our water safe? You need to have regulations.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, if this is getting too scientific, just watch Dark Waters. It's the movie with Mark Ruffalo where he fought DuPont, who was releasing PFAS into the Ohio River Valley. Whole lot of people got cancer. Whole lot of people died. Massive lawsuits. So that's what we're talking about here. Cancers, reproductive issues, and a whole lot of other things. Speaking of, as part of that blanket executive action, he also, the lead and copper rule, which is frankly, I think, inadequate EPA regulation to regulate lead. It's part of why Flint was poisoned. And, now it's considered under the allowable limit for lead in Flint, even though, people still are showing water problems. Anyway, Biden administration was trying to finally revise the lead and copper rule. They were obviously trying to expedite the removal of lead pipes. Can you talk about what Trump's reversal does in terms of moving us backwards as far as lead and water?
Sure. So millions of people across the country still are served drinking water through lead service lines. These are the pipes that connect your home to the water main in the street. So EPA estimates there are 9 million homes and other properties that still have a lead service line in place. So the Biden administration at the end of October released the lead and copper rule improvements, which sped up the pace that utilities are required to replace these lead service lines. Lead service lines are the primary way we get lead from drinking water. So removing lead service lines will dramatically help mitigate the risk of lead from water. It is one of the best ways to address lead in water. It's not complete, like you mentioned, but it is one of the best ways to address the issue of lead in water. Lead is a dangerous neurotoxin. It harms every major system of the human body. So Biden administration, October, released the lead and copper rule improvements. It replaced a Trump era regulation that actually weakened the lead rule. Trump's regulation slowed down the pace that those lead service lines were replaced. So the Biden administration released it in October. Unfortunately, it's too late in the administration that it's vulnerable to the Congressional Review Act. So House Republicans have already introduced a resolution that would repeal it outright. It's Joint House Resolution 18 from Representative Palmer. Another resolution may be coming. The House this week is trying to vote on a legislation that would allow them to do a huge package of rollbacks of regulations from the Biden administration. So we could see it repealed outright by Congress. The Trump administration also on January 30th issued a filing and a lawsuit. So the water industry doesn't like the lead and copper rule improvements. They say that it'll be too expensive. This is a false choice. People shouldn't have to choose between toxic water and safe water. We have enough funding available to make sure all those lead pipes are replaced. It's just an issue of political will. But the water industry has sued to stop the lead and copper rule. And the end of January, the Trump administration issued put a filing in that said that it wanted 60 more days to consider the rule to see if it's actually going to defend it. So this is another thing we're looking at and watching and making sure that EPA defends this rule in court. Again, like you mentioned, it's not perfect, right? There's a lot of, it doesn't require all communities to replace lead service lines, but it requires most communities to replace lead service lines within 10 years. So that's one of the things we're watching for. Will the Trump administration defend it in court? And if they don't, what will happen to that rule? And then we're also looking at Congress. We're trying to make sure that Congress will not approve a Congressional Review Act resolution to repeal it outright. So we had rallies in districts when the House was back in district, targeting members who, Republican members who might be more amenable to vote no on this resolution. We think we have the votes to try to stop it in the House. The margins are really close. And lead is such a pressing issue across the country. A lot of communities are impacted. And this rule will save lives. I think the EPA estimated that the rule itself would prevent low birth rates in up to 900,000 infants. It will prevent developmental disorders in up to 2,600 children, and it will reduce 1,500 cases of premature death from heart disease. So this rule that we're defending will have profound public health impacts. We need to defend it, and we need to push for more so that we can make sure that every community has safe lead-free water.
Just like a big picture question. I mean, a lot of people that I talk to and read comments are just worried that like the next war is going to be over water. They see water is now being traded. That's as of 2020 as a commodity by stock traders. They see, you know, one environmental disaster after the next, Flint, East Palestine, many others we cover, and, you know, contamination of the water, and basically a wild, wild west as far as regulation. You know, should people be concerned, big picture in America, about water across the board, lead, PFAS, and other contamination?
I think so. I think we need everyone to reach out to their elected officials, their Congress members, to fight for funding to make sure we have safe and affordable water. We need the regulations in place to make them safe and affordable, and we need to hold polluters accountable to clean up their toxic mess. People often think about water as like a renewable resource, but once you pollute it, it's really hard to clean it up. So we need to make sure that we are managing our existing water supplies for the benefit of people and the planet. One thing when you're thinking about war that I'm hearing people talk about is Canada's very scared about Trump's threat of being the 51st state and that there might be an invasion, and their talk about wanting Canada's mineral resources. Trump has also talked about wanting Canada's water before. So it's something that we need to keep in mind, that we have the water resources we need here in our local communities. We just need to manage them better. We need to hold these polluters accountable to clean it up. And we need to really stop the big water abusers, the factory farms, the fossil fuel extraction that is destroying our access to safe and affordable water.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary Grant. She is the Public Water for All Director at Food and Water Watch. Everyone go to Food and Water Watch's website. They do great work. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.